In a grand theater, a magician sits quietly, trying to summon something with all his powers. He begins to create a fume that forms the image of a woman. A woman in the audience instantly shouts that she knows who the woman is and screams for help. Suddenly, the police present at the scene surround the audience, and the inspector declares the magician's arrest on the grounds of threatening public safety. The inspector then reports to the crown prince about what happened, and the prince demands that an end be put to the situation. In the beginning of the story, a young man named Eisenheim wandered through the fields and met a traveling magician. The magician amazed him with simple but impressive tricks. Later, the magician did a trick that made him vanish in thin air, and from that moment, Eisenheim was hooked. Back in his room, he started practicing magic, though the townsfolk judged him for being different. Then there was Sophie, a royal girl who spotted him one day while riding her horse. She admired him not for his magic, but for who he was. They would meet and talk, but one day, her caretakers barged in, interrupting their time together. Because he was a poor peasant and she came from royal blood, they were forbidden to be together. But their feelings for each other only grew stronger. They made a secret promise in a hidden cave to run away and be together forever. Eisenheim even gave her a special heart-shaped pendant with his photo as a token of their love. One night, as they met again in the cave, guards came searching for Sophie. She begged Eisenheim to make them disappear, but his magic failed. That night, they were torn apart and never saw each other again. 15 years later, Eisenheim had become a famous magician performing in Vienna. During one of his shows, he gave a woman from the audience a handkerchief closed in a small box and later starts talking about time and how it could be manipulated. He takes out the seed of an orange and plants it in front of the crowd, and they were amazed by watching a tree grow from a seed right before their eyes, even making butterflies appear with the same handkerchief he had given to the woman in the beginning of the show. The audience erupted in applause, including Inspector Yule, who was watching closely. Outside the show, Eisenheim gave money to poor children with a little magic trick and then met with his manager Joseph to discuss their earnings. Later, Yule entered the theater, snooping around to figure out Eisenheim's tricks, but Eisenheim stopped him, warning him not to touch the equipment. Yule mentioned that the crown prince, Leopold, would attend his performance that night. When Leopold arrived, Eisenheim began the show by asking the audience what would it be like after a human being dies and calls for a volunteer, but no one stepped forward. Finally, Leopold chose the woman next to him, Sophie, now the Duchess von Teschen. Eisenheim was shocked to realize it was the same Sophie he had loved. She acted as if they had never met before, though Eisenheim's heart raced with memories. During the show, Eisenheim created an illusion where Sophie was attacked by a figure in the mirror. She fainted briefly, but the show ended with applause. Afterward, Eisenheim visited Sophie and Leopold, where Leopold asked if he had supernatural powers. Eisenheim remained vague, neither confirming nor denying anything. The prince then invites him to perform at his palace, to which Eisenheim replies it would be an honor. Eisenheim later told Sophie something only she would recognize, making her realize he still remembered her. Joseph warned him that Leopold wasn't good to Sophie, hinting that the prince had a violent streak with women. The next day, Sophie secretly met Eisenheim in his carriage, and they spoke about their past. Sophie confessed she had always hoped they'd run away together, and though they couldn't back then, it was clear their feelings hadn't faded. Unfortunately, they were being watched, and you'll soon learn about their secret meeting. Eisenheim tried to downplay their connection when questioned, saying they were only childhood friends, but you'll remain suspicious. He warned Eisenheim to stay away from Sophie, as Leopold was powerful and dangerous. Later, Eisenheim goes to the palace and starts to perform, and Leopold challenges Eisenheim to perform a trick with his sword, and Eisenheim performed an extraordinary illusion that made it look like the sword stood on its own. Some of the royal men tried to lift the sword but failed. Even the army general tried, but he couldn't move the sword at all. When Leopold failed to lift it, the audience laughed, and though he eventually succeeded, he was humiliated and left angry, ordering Yule to stop Eisenheim's performances. Later, Sophie visited Eisenheim, warning him that Leopold wanted to drive him out of the city. Tension built between them, and they shared a passionate kiss, reigniting the love they had always felt. As they lay together, Sophie opened up about Leopold's dangerous plans to overthrow his father, and Eisenheim suggested they run away, just as they had once promised. But Sophie, afraid for their safety, wasn't sure they could ever escape Leopold's reach. One morning, Eisenheim noticed that someone had torn up his posters on the street. Frustrated, Joseph, his manager, complained that Eisenheim was asking for trouble by messing with Prince Leopold. But Eisenheim didn't care and simply asked for his money. He took all his cash from the bank, packed his suitcase, and strolled through the city. As he reached a carriage, he left his suitcase behind and received a kiss from Sophie before she rode off. A man hiding in the distance watched everything and quickly reported it to Inspector Yule. Later, at the train station, Yule secretly spied on Eisenheim, overhearing a conversation about his plan to escape with Sophie. Yule took the information straight to Prince Leopold, who thanked him calmly, not showing any anger. Meanwhile, Sophie paced nervously in her room, waiting for Leopold. When he finally confronted her, he was blunt about what he knew. Sophie didn't deny anything, which made Leopold furious. His true nature came out. He was arrogant, cruel, and controlling. Sophie stayed calm and told him she would never marry him. In a fit of rage, Leopold slapped her and threatened worse if she disobeyed him. Still composed, Sophie announced she was leaving and hurried outside. Leopold, fuming, chased after her and struck her with his sword. Sophie, injured, managed to ride away on her horse but eventually collapsed. The next morning, her horse was found wandering the streets without her, and bloodstains were spotted on its saddle. A search party was sent out, and eventually, Sophie's body was discovered floating in a river, caught in a tree. Eisenheim, heartbroken, jumped into the water to pull her lifeless body out. Inspector Yule began investigating Sophie's death. As he examined her, a doctor arrived and angrily stopped Yule from further disturbing her body. Before leaving, the doctor handed Yule a gemstone that had been found in Sophie's pocket. Later, Eisenheim confronted Yule, accusing Leopold of killing Sophie because she was going to leave him. But Yule defended the prince, saying Leopold had been in Budapest, so he couldn't have done it. Though Eisenheim was devastated, he couldn't prove anything, and Yule warned him to stop making accusations, or he'd end up in jail. Yule continued his investigation and found a shiny object in the stables, but before he could investigate further, Leopold arrived. The prince asked Yule if he had found a suspect, skillfully hiding his own guilt. Eisenheim, still convinced Leopold was responsible, wasn't satisfied when the police arrested someone else for Sophie's murder. Time passed, and Eisenheim purchased an old theater, fired Joseph, and transformed his magic shows into something entirely new. On the day of the grand reopening, the theater was packed. As the audience watched, Eisenheim performed a strange show where he seemed to summon the image of a dead man. People in the audience, believing it was real, started asking the man questions about the afterlife. But Eisenheim ended the show abruptly, leaving the crowd unsettled. His performances grew more controversial, gaining a mysterious, almost cult-like following. Word reached the prince, but Leopold dismissed Eisenheim as a fraud and ordered Yule to figure out his tricks and arrest him. Yule suspected Eisenheim was using a projector, but couldn't explain how the illusions seemed so lifelike. As the apparitions became even more realistic, Yule and his men took Eisenheim in for questioning. Yule demanded to know how the magician created the illusions, but Eisenheim simply reminded him that a magician never reveals his secrets. Their conversation was interrupted when Yule's assistant told him to look out the window. A crowd had gathered, seemingly ready to defend Eisenheim. Yule accused Eisenheim of planning to overthrow the prince, but Eisenheim denied it, saying his only goal was to honor Sophie's memory. Yule, still unconvinced, warned him again to stop, but Eisenheim refused, knowing the truth about Sophie's murder was still hidden. During his next performance, Sophie's ghostly image appeared on stage. The crowd gasped, and someone shouted, asking who had killed her. The image of Sophie revealed that her murderer was in the audience. Although Leopold was secretly there, no one pointed him out directly. Tension filled the theater, but Sophie's ghost vanished, leaving the audience shocked. Leopold left, dismissing the apparition as a mere trick. Still, he couldn't hide how much it bothered him. Leopold commanded Yule to arrest Eisenheim, determined to end the magician's influence. Yule, not wanting to arrest him, pleaded with Eisenheim to stop his performances, but Eisenheim, devastated by Sophie's death, said he couldn't. He was doing it all to be with her, even if it was just through an illusion. When the guards surrounded the theater, Eisenheim prepared himself for what was coming. He handed over his assets to Joseph, who accepted without question. Then, in front of the entire audience, Sophie's image appeared again. The crowd erupted, accusing the prince of murder. Yule approached the stage, preparing to arrest Eisenheim, but as he reached out, his hand passed right through the magician. Eisenheim had turned into an apparition himself, and before anyone could react, he vanished into thin air. The guards searched every corner of the theater and even raided Eisenheim's home, but he was nowhere to be found. Yule finds nothing of importance, just a book revealing the methods to make the necklace Eisenheim had given to Sophie. Yule confronted Leopold, accusing him of murder, but the prince arrogantly denied everything. However, Yule had already reported Leopold's crimes to the emperor. As the emperor's officers approached, Leopold panicked, locking himself in his mansion. In a final, desperate act, he shot himself, unable to face the consequences of his actions. Days after these unexpected events, Yule, now promoted, walked through the city when a young boy handed him a note explaining how Eisenheim's orange tree trick worked. Realizing the magician was still alive, Yule raced to the train station, where he just missed Eisenheim, who was in disguise. Smiling to himself, Yule finally understood that he had been part of Eisenheim's greatest illusion all along. Yule returned to the barn where Sophie had been killed and found her pendant hidden in the hay. Inside was a picture of Eisenheim and a gemstone. Yule pieced it all together. Eisenheim had faked Sophie's death, and everything had been part of a carefully crafted illusion. Eisenheim, free at last, walked through the meadows, ready to start a new life with Sophie, just as they had always dreamed. Tell me in the comments how Eisenheim pulled off the apparition trick.